1993, when 10-year-olds Jon Venables and Robert Thompson became the youngest ever convicted murderers for killing 2-year-old James Bulger. And his family were promised the pair would spend the rest of their lives behind bars.
Both were then released on licence after serving 8 years, but Jon Venables, who's been recalled to jail twice, has reportedly been granted a new parole hearing. So should child killers ever get the chance to be released, or should life mean life? Joining us now, human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, who believes prison should be about rehabilitation, criminal defence lawyer Paul Britton, who thinks convicted child killers should never be given the opportunity for parole. Peter, I was the Secretary of State when Baby P, that terrible case of the child who was killed, and his mother, Tracy Connolly, the stepfather, Stephen Barker, both went to prison. I have to say, when the mother was released, I found that very, very hard, because what had happened to that little boy was so cruel. Barker is still in prison. I think the parole board has said there's been no remorse. But in her case, am I right to feel that?
Well, first let me say that my heart goes out to the family of James Bulger. I understand and empathise with the pain and suffering they've been through. Sure. But I do think that all prisoners, if they've satisfied rigorous requirements, should be eligible for a parole hearing, but that does not mean they should get it. So in the case of Jon Venables, he has twice reoffended since his original release in 2001, and I therefore feel very sceptical that he should get parole.
And Paul Britton, you believe that he should not be released, and on top of that, that Robert Thompson, the other killer, should not have been released.
Well, we're talking about a parole hearing. Now, these two individuals have already had a hearing. They had a hearing in the Crown Court. There was 12 jurors that found them guilty. The judge sentenced them. The judge decided to sentence them for a whole life sentence. Now, there is an option when judges sentence to give a parole date, so you might get a whole life sentence, but in 23 years, for example, you can apply for parole. When you get a whole life, and there's no date for parole, it should be that entire period. Now,
like Lucy Letby.
Like Lucy Letby. Now, could you ever imagine a situation where Lucy Letby was coming for a parole hearing? And parole in the day used to be a word of honour. So it's a prisoner given their word that they're not going to reoffend, that they've been rehabilitated. How you rehabilitate someone that's murdered a child. We're not talking about drug dealers or people that are dependent
But in the case of poor Jamie Bulger, and again, you know, I totally agree, Peter. I mean, our hearts are with the family of a murdered child. But there are two young men here, one of whom has been released and never given any reason to be recalled, seems to have been rehabilitated, and one who does, you know, whose parole hearing potentially is coming up.
But in terms of Venables,
who has reoffended.
That's right. He's
so,
already
so should it be,
been
not
given
be
that
done on a
chance.
case-by-case basis?
Venables has already been given that chance. He got parole. He was let out. He had photos of children abuse and not only received them, but distributed them.
But you're saying that he should never have been given the chance in the first place?
I think he should. The sort of people that commit these offences, no, they've had a hearing.
Even if they're 10 years old when they commit the offence?
The second hearing they should have would be an appeal. That would be the second hearing.
Right. But there's no doubt
that
they were guilty.
What we talk
but
about,
if you're 10 years old and you're guilty,
but Ed, what we talk about is rehabilitation. What role are these people going to have in society? What job are they going to do? Are they going to teach our children?
Well, we don't know.
Are they going to empty our bins? Are we going to allow them into our neighbourhoods?
They're given lifelong anonymity orders in this case.
But they're also under licence, so therefore the licence can restrict their activities, where they go, the jobs they do.
Like I said, what contribution are they going to make? What job would you allow them to do?
Peter, if Jon Venables was released on parole, Paul makes a good point. I mean, you know, the crimes that he's committed are horrific.
Well, the person who he was convicted alongside, Robert Thompson, was released in 2001 following a parole hearing, and he has not reoffended. So it would appear that he has been rehabilitated. And I think that hope of redemption should be held out for everyone. Now, the role
even
of prison...
someone like Jon Venables, who's guilty of murder and then these subsequent horrific offences.
Well, that's what I told you. I said, because he's committed these subsequent offences, I'm very sceptical that he has reformed, but none of us know. That has to be an assessment by psychologists and psychiatrists, by prison staff and others. And someone should only ever be released if there's very, very strong evidence that they have reformed. Now, I've got to say, the aim of prison is to punish and deter, but it should also be to rehabilitate. And I have been to HMP Grendon, a prison in Buckinghamshire, where the focus is on rehabilitation. And the reoffending rates there are 3 times less than the national average. I think the model of Grendon Prison should be rolled out across the entire country to give a much higher rate of non-reoffending and rehabilitation where prisoners come back into society and lead productive, responsible lives.
OK. Peter Tatchell, Paul Britton, thank you very much indeed. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Defence said dangerous prisoners undergo a strict assessment by the Parole Board before any release, and we are further strengthening the system so that the most dangerous offenders are kept behind bars.